Welcome back to our Asynchronous Dialogue, Week 4, COM 4413, Communication and Cultural Change. We are talking about television as we have all course long, and we just can't get enough of it, right? We are breaking it down, comparing it with our readings, and so Elizabeth has some excellent questions for us and some reflections on the content we encountered in Week 4. Mattel describes in Complex TV the setup of the soap opera and explains how they usually end with, quote, a moment of uncertainty, end quote. I think when shows abuse the cliffhanger concept just for thrills, it leaves me disappointed with the content. It's frustrating when characters are supposedly killed off and then brought back time and time again. Agreed. This is a cheap gimmick, right? A cheap trick or a gimmick that writers are aware of. It's an old soap opera trick, and this goes back to that reflecting on how our contemporary dramas pull from the raw materials of the soap or the melodrama, the afternoon melodrama, and they use some parts while they look for ways to fashion new types of innovative storytelling. And that's an old writer's trick, right? So someone, let's say it's a soap opera and they've got to film all the time, endless episodes that run all year round. You may have actors or actresses and they need to take leave. Maybe there's a medical issue. Actress gets pregnant, say, and you know they don't have an organic way to work it into the show, and so they'll do things. Or contract disputes, or someone gets their big break and moves on, and so it might be time to do the natural thing, which is kill the character off. And but maybe things don't work out the same, or a person is ready to come back, and wouldn't you know it, it was actually, character Y. It was their doppelganger, or now we're introducing their evil twin. Not that that's a bad idea, right? That's right. This is not, you're never going to hear me say the evil twin plot device is not effective, because it's kind of amazing, right? Anyway, so this is something we see time and again, but when it's used cheaply, I agree, it's not effective. Good television can build suspense without overusing cliffhangers. Could this abuse of the cliffhanger be one of the reasons soaps have lost their popularity? Probably not. I think ridiculous plotting in the soap opera is part of its stock and trade. I actually think people tune in for the over-the-top antics, if you will, after a certain while. In fact, that becomes a kind of comfort food for long-term or devoted audiences. With more and more streaming content, do you think soap operas have an actual future, or are they on the road to extinction? And we have seen in recent years several of the long-standing, long-running, prominent soap operas retire and face cancellation. But at the same time, there will always be a market for that. I think once television as a medium, as a dominant fixture is established, there's certain genres we won't see completely vanish. Okay, the game show is not going anywhere, because not only is it entertaining to certain demographics, it's cheap to produce. And as we learned through reading about actually that was extracurricular readings we did, but on the production values of soap operas, they are relatively cheap and easy to produce as well. So while they decline in certain ways, for now they're persisting. Let's talk about some questions from the televisual transitions. Television's Masculine Midlife Crisis PDF file that was part of our course readings, and this came out from in a special issue of the journal Ink and Letters. And so let's see. Author talks about our love and fascination with the detective figure. And I have a soft spot for Westerns, both old and new. Do you think the cowboy and westerns could fall into this category too? So category like the detectives that we're suggesting here. There's something about the troubled soul, not good, but not bad type of character, think Christian Bale's Batman, that I gravitate to in film and television. Absolutely. Elizabeth is identifying the anti-hero archetype, all right? And so the anti-hero took on great prominence in recent years in a number of TV shows to varying shades or degrees of virtuous versus villainous. And, you know, texts like The Sopranos or Mad Men or Breaking Bad were recognized as playing with the formulas and conventions of the anti-hero, and how far audiences would go, perhaps either in support of it or to follow the text. And, you know, I think that's it had become novel again in the sense of the heightened narrative complexity of the TV drama, but it's an old formula, and you're right, we do see that in the noir detective. All right, so the hard-boiled detective figure is an anti-hero. It's usually a deeply flawed character at the center of the narrative, and that plays an important role in the you know, how the plot unfolds, because some kind of the flaws in that character will inevitably come to fruition in how they do or don't have success in either solving the mystery or sort of returning the status quo to a state of normalcy, that sort of thing. And we see that in some westerns as well. The classical western hero is an archetype, and it is a very virtuous hero. But as the western grew in prominence, there was that swing emergence of an anti-hero type figure, right? Because this idea of the western hero as a gun shooter that was blazing, you know, not blazing saddles, but blazing six shooters. That idea became problematic, right, to a certain segment. And so there became this inward reflection on the nature of violence, and that's an excellent theme, and there is a clear through line there in terms of influence for the piece we read on television, Transitions. A great book we could recommend is, let's see, it's too far up there to reach, but Lawrence and Jewett's The Myth of the American Superhero from Doubleday in 2002 was maybe the most recent edition of that book. But they talk about the American monomyth, rather, as this specific offshoot of what Joseph Campbell wrote about as the monomyth hero in all of storytelling on a sort of a global scale. And that's a great book that has an argument that explores how we get to the place we do with American ways of thinking about and creating our heroes, and what kinds of values that might reflect. Do you think we'll get to a place where women are portrayed as the anti-hero as frequently as men? I think Geena Davis in recent years gave this talk that just about sums it up, where my the right answer would be for someone to say, yeah, sure, we're headed there. But Geena Davis gave this talk, and I need to have more information on this, but she essentially gave a kind of pseudo statistic, like, I've done the numbers, and female characters are really making, you know, as central figures are making huge strides, and at this pace we will achieve equality in a mere 700 years or something like this. And you know, it's both a rim shot and a absolute, you know, mood breaker. and that's accurate, right? There needs to be, far greater increases in those types of creative developments across all fronts, and that's yet another reason we need strong female voices in criticism as well. Like, let's accelerate this process. Let's get out there and encourage this development. But in recent years, I think of the Arya character in Game of Thrones as a prominent female anti-hero. Elizabeth was comparing to Jessica Jones as an example that came to mind. But Arya in Game of Thrones definitely goes down that path, right? And where she ends up, we shall see. But that's someone to look out for. Elizabeth Moss, who the name, tickles the ear a little bit. She was a featured player in Mad Men, and now is part of the highly acclaimed, talked about show, The Handmaid's Tale. Well, in between, she was a part of a limited series that circulated on the streaming networks, and it's called Top of the Lake. And Top of the Lake, she plays a full-blown anti-hero figure. Okay, so it's cut right out of the hard-boiled detective mode. Highly recommend her performance in that limited series. It's only about 6 episodes. Takes place, shot in New Zealand, so it's very unique. Okay, Westworld. I know Elizabeth's familiar with this text. Westworld, it works to try to promote up, right, to kind of elevate its female characters, and definitely you're seeing that in the primary. It's been so long since I've seen it. I'm trying to remember what they call the synthetic beings on the show, right? This sort of AI. But both of the main female AI embody some anti-heroine characteristics that are going to make for intriguing viewing in subsequent seasons. So also, I think critics have compared the Good Wife and Scandal, right? These could be viewed as examples of that as well. Looking at the communication theory in millennial popular culture, Chapter 3 uses the terms God term, devil term. Are these the same as what we call protagonist, antagonist, good versus evil, etc., or something different? Can you elaborate a little bit more? I think what we see is, with these God and devil terms, when we have these anti-hero shows, since we were talking about anti-heroes just now, they become blurred a little bit more. They become transgressed, even in dramas like Game of Thrones, Sons of Anarchy, The Walking Dead, okay, again, perhaps Breaking Bad. These shows, sometimes you can identify something very evil, and then sometimes you can identify something very virtuous, and yet I think where we get the melodrama is when characters we begin to sympathize with do something appalling, or when a character is introduced as a negative figure, or over the course of the show becomes more redemptive. All right, so maybe think about the way Jaime Lannister evolves as a character in Game of Thrones, or perhaps think about the way that Walter White devolves at the center of Breaking Bad. And so these are ways in which this sort of God term, devil term can become problematized there. So chapter 5 talks about Game of Thrones. Try not to invoke spoilers for anyone watching, but Ned Stark's honor as a Stark, pun intended, contrasts to many other characters' morally gray attitudes. In real life, our choices are much more aligned with everyone else instead of Ned. Could that be one of the reasons this show is so popular? People view reality in increasing shades of gray. People are viewing their content in increasing shade. The internet is literally a shade of gray. That's why these negotiations about regulations is so fascinating, and how much censorship should go on, because it's kind of a no man's land, or that this all of a sudden a throwback term that doesn't feel right. But we get these ideas like postmodern, fragmented, neoliberal, globalist, etc. These are getting at the heart of this concern you raise. And so, yes, I think we find identification outside of Ned Stark.